In this video, we will learn about unit testing for our Ionic Angular LinkedIn clone application. We'll focus on testing services and components, as these are the main building blocks of an Angular application. In particular, we'll test the authentication module service and template-driven form component, with both having dependencies of the HTTP client and the router. So Angular comes bundled with Karma and Jasmine to help us perform unit tests. So I'm just going to give a demonstration of what we're going to do today. If I come to the command line and I type in ng test, it's going to test all of our .spec files, and in particular we're testing the auth server spec file and also the auth page spec component. So one thing to notice is when we do this, it actually brings up Karma, which is a test runner, and it shows us in this GUI format all of our specs, and we can see what we've done here. So we can see on our auth service we've tested the register method and tested to see whether or not it should return the user upon registration, and also should return an error if there's a response if email address already exists. So if there's already if there's already an account with an email, we want some sort of error there, so we can test for those sorts of things. And then also in the component in our auth page, we should be able to toggle from the join to the login page, and we should also be able to reroute to another page after we've logged in, and we should be able to create the component with the form. So if we go to our project, we're currently up to if we just go back to the main folder structure here, we can cd into our LinkedIn application here. And I'm just going to run a Control-C to kill that particular instance here. So in our application, if we run an ng test, we're going to get a couple of errors, and that's mainly due to the fact that we haven't actually done any of our testing. So when we use the Ionic CLI, in some instances we actually turned off the spec files, but a couple of them are existing, but they're not fully written out or anything like that. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and delete a couple of those. But before I do, I just wanted to briefly talk a little bit more about Karma and Jasmine. So we saw before that it brought up Karma, the test runner, and essentially it's a tool that spawns a web server and it executes source code against the test code. So Jasmine is a batteries included behavior-driven testing framework, and that's what actually allows us to write the tests, so creating the test suites and assertions and all of that. So Karma runs it in the web server and executes the test code and checks it against our code, whereas Jasmine's more about actually writing the tests themselves. And while we even use write tests, so unit testing, it helps us write clean code and catch bugs by considering the expected behavior in which the functions are consumed, and doing this, it helps us to discover any unexpected behavior such as unhandled edge cases or type issues or anything like that. So when we use the Angular CLI or the Ionic CLI to create an application, it actually already takes care of the configuration for us. So if we just open up this package JSON here, we'll see that we've got this command here, ng test, and we've also got our dependencies. So if I search for Karma, we see we've got our different related Karma packages. And then likewise, if I search for Jasmine, you can see that we've got the various Jasmine packages here. But how this script works, basically there's this karma conf.js file, and this is a partial karma configuration file, which is set up for our Angular application. So, you know, all this stuff's configured for us when we install Angular or create a project or Ionic. So basically, if we just take a quick look at this, we can see that it references Jasmine, because you can actually have different types of testing frameworks if you wanted to do that. But if you're using Angular, I'd recommend sticking with the Angular way of doing things. So Karma and Jasmine. And you can actually come here and configure things. So let's say you wanted to have a certain percentage of test coverage. You could come here and add and edit these sorts of things in here. And this Karma conf.js works in conjunction with this Angular JSON. So if we have a look at the, if we just type in Karma here, we can see this test, which is relating to the testing of the test script. There's some things already set up for us, and it references this Karma config file. And that's essentially how the Karma works. So it's all configured for us and a package already created for us. So with that said, let's just go ahead and start to work on our testing. So I'm just going to close these 3 files here. And it just references a couple of files that have a spec file, but they're not necessarily completed, or they have some errors with them. So we see that we've got this start post component. I'm just going to go ahead and open up the source folder and go into app, and I believe it's in home here, in the components here. We have the start post component, and there's this spec file here. So we're just going to go ahead and delete this. And also in the start post, in the modal, there's a file here, and we're just going to delete that as well. And there's also a tabs component. So I'm just going to go ahead and open that up. And I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. And of course you could just search for all the .spec files as well. I think that's pretty much all of them. So I'm just going to go ahead and just do a clear of my console. And then just run the ng test again. And I might do a Control P or a Control Shift P, and just the Control P and just type in .spec to see which files. So these are referring to the API folder. So I don't think there's too many more. We can take a look at Karma, because that has the representation. So there's also this advertising component. So we can come in here and we can just go ahead and delete this. This one just happened to work. And now we don't have any of the testing or .spec files except for the app component spec file. So if we just take a quick look at this, just to get a feel for what's going on, is we're testing an app component. So this is the main component, and basically we just want to test whether or not it can be created. So it should create the app. So there's not much actually in the app component, but we know that it gets bootstrapped through the index files, and so so essentially what we do here, we have this describe block, and this describes the particular suite, and that's just a bunch of related topics. So it could be that we should create the app, but then it also should be that the app has a title or something like that, and that would be subcategories under the main testing suite. And that's pretty much written here. It should create the app for us. Now there's this concept of a testbed component. This is essentially similar to how we have modules and components in Angular. We want to sort of mimic that behavior and create a test version of that. And basically this Jasmine suite, we're describing the component, and then we can see that we have the particular thing that we're testing, the particular unit test. It should create the app, and that's the thing here. And then of course when we have a module, we set up the testing module, and then we have to have our declarations as we do. So app component, and then this is the same as the actual real app component or app module, where you have these types of things, although it tends to be a little more a little less. So remember, what we're doing here in a unit test is we're testing for things in isolation, not integrated together. So we'll cover integrated end-to-end test in the next video, but unit tests where, for example, if we just want to test a service method, or for in a component we just want to test something works independent of the service, and doing that helps us catch for any bugs or anything like that. So yeah, we essentially configure the test module and have all the declarations, and then later on we'll see we have dependencies and stuff like that, and then you can go ahead and compile the components. This happens before every one of the unit tests. So we're essentially creating a new testing module each test in this particular testing suite, and we have to use this wait for a sync keyword, which is sort of like using a sync before the arguments, and that's just because this is an asynchronous operation. It takes a little bit of time to configure the testing module when you type in the ng test command, and then of course using the test bed, the testing module, we can create a component on that module, and then there's this debug element where it's more or less you're taking the an instance of this particular component, and then we just expect that app to be true. So that's more or less the general basis of how a unit test for a component is structured. We're actually going to start off on a unit test for the service because it tends to be a little bit easier to do. So what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and we'll open up the auth module, and then we'll go to services, and we've got this auth.service. Now the convention is to have the same file name, so auth.service, and then just have this .spec file at the end of it, and then the file extension, which is TypeScript. And the way things are configured, it will automatically scan throughout our application for all these .spec files, and it will run those tests for us. So I'm just going to go ahead and stop this connection to our test runner Karma. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start to write our test out a little bit. So basically what we want to start off by doing is just let's create our testing suite, and we'll import things and set up the before each after we just get a general feel. So it's good to actually, when you generate services and components and you don't turn off, it automatically creates the spec file for you. And typically you would just be writing these tests as you go sort of thing. But this is a good opportunity to write it from scratch, both the service and the component, to really understand what's going on and what it's generating. So basically you just want to put the name of the thing you're testing as the test suite. So we're testing the auth service, and then it has this particular callback looking sort of thing here, and that just is an indication for us to test for things within here. Now, one thing to note is we can actually have nested suites. So within the auth service, for example, we might want to have 5 different unit tests for the register method. So if we take a look at this auth service, just to remember what it looks like, there's a whole bunch here, and this could obviously be refactored and split into multiple services and stuff, but you know, we'll test for this register method here. But within the testing for the register method, we want to be checking for multiple things perhaps. So we could have a nested suite for that, and then we could have another section for login or anything else we wanted to test for. So I'm actually going to have this nested suite. We're going to describe the register method here, and it's sort of implied that it's relating to the auth service because it's nested inside of it, and we'll see that formatted nicely for us in the GUI. And this is where we actually have our unit test. So the way you have a unit test is you basically have this it here, and it should do something, and you want to keep these descriptions relatively simple, because when you're reading through all your unit tests, you just want to have a glance and you just want to have the logic sort of implied. So we know it's an auth service, we know it's a register method that we're calling. So the register method, what it should do, and if we have a look at it, we know that it's returning a observable of the user type based on our user that we register with, or new user. So basically it should just return the user, and because this is a observable, and when you're testing for services, you're often, you know, making HTTP requests and you're going to get an observable back. As a second parameter here, you can have this done, and this is built in, as we can see here. It's an action method that should be called when the async work is complete. So basically, because this is running line by line, basically, you know, if we had another unit test below this, this might not finish properly if it's an asynchronous task. So we have to just have this parameter done, and then we just have to call done when our asynchronous operation has completed. So this is just a callback essentially, or takes that sort of shape. And basically what we're wanting to do is we're expecting when we post a particular user that will get a different form back. So I might just start off by actually, we need to set up a few things before we can do this. So we've seen in the previous in the app service spec file that we had this before each thing, which was going to happen before each of our unit tests run. And what this is going to do is it's going to have the setup that we need. It's going to provide the things that we need. So if we take a look at our auth service, we can't actually just call the methods in our auth service just yet. And the reason being is we actually have these dependencies. So we see that we've got this HTTP client and this router. So we need to sort of have a spy, it's called. So I think one way to explain what a spy is to first explain a mock. So we know that we're going to have a new user. So if I just have a mock new user of the type new user, and we set that equal, and if we just take a look at new user to refresh our memories here, it's just the first name, last name, email and password. So let's just go ahead and copy that. And I'm just going to change the first name to John, change the last name to Pepink, change the email to john@hotmail.com, and change password to password. And these should all be commas. So it's easy to see that we're going to, rather than have some sort of integrated test where we're getting those details from the form, from the UI, and getting it from the TypeScript ng form, and then putting that in there, we don't actually care about the component. We only care about the service. We're testing the service in isolation. So we can just mock those values of the new user that we're registering. So we'll use that when we test our service for our registration. But I also wanted to highlight the difference between a mock and a spy. They're very similar actually, but basically we can see in the constructor here that we have this HTTP client and the router. Now in this particular mock, and the mock could have like functions in it and stuff, and it could return things like that as well, but essentially this is completely, we made this up. Whereas a spy, for example, the HTTP client spy, it's actually going to be a subset of the, HTTP client methods, but they work as if they were actually real. So to explain that in more detail with an example, if we had the HTTP client spy, we know that a HTTP client, if we look at a HTTP client, we'll press F12, it has the method, has the URL, has options, and then within those you can have all the different types. So you could have, get, post, put, delete, and all that sort of stuff. So we don't need the entire HTTP client. All we're doing is we're just testing for the post case. So we don't even need to be doing any of this like stuff. We just want to sort of have a post method and a response to that. And a spy can also determine how many times a particular function has been called. So I'm just going to write post here, and this is of the type Jasmine spy. And while I'm here, I may as well also get the auth service, because we're going to need the auth service because that's what we're testing, and we're testing a particular method within it. Oh, that wasn't what I wanted. I want the auth service. For some reason I'm not getting the IntelliSense I want. So I'm just going to come up here and just say import auth service. Okay, there we go. And I'm also going to say I want to let the router spy, and in this analogous sort of way, we don't need all of the methods and properties, we just need a subset. So of the router type, if we take a look at that and import that, we can see that we have all sorts of things here. And the only one we really need, and we don't even really need it just now, but we will later on, is the navigate by URL method, wherever that one is. So if we come back to our spec file here, we've created our spies, and we've created our service, and we've created our mock of the new user. So we have everything we need to begin to work on our before each. So we can say that the HTTP client spy, this is just nothing more than a, we're just creating a spy object here. So Jasmine has this built-in method called create spy object, and we just give it the name of the actual thing. So in this case it's the HTTP client, and all we want to do is just, you know, mimic the post method, and of course you could have a comma separated more if you had more to test here. So we're spying on that post method in the HTTP client. So what we can do next is we can say, okay, we can do a similar thing for the router spy, and this is going to be Jasmine create spy object, and this time for the router, and the method we want from there and to mimic is the navigate by URL method. So this means when we create our auth service, and remember our auth service needs to have this HTTP client and router dependency sorted out. So we can say auth service, which, you know, we have here as the type auth service. We can just create a new auth service, and we can pass in the HTTP client spy, and we can also pass in the router spy. Now here we are expecting this HTTP client type and router type explicitly, and of course we've got this subset of that. So we can just circumvent this by just typing in as any here and as any here, and that's perfectly fine to use the any in this particular case there. So we've got everything set up essentially. Now what we want to do is it should return the user upon registering. So now we can have our expected user, and recall when you sign up with the first name, last name, email and password, you actually get the expected user back. So you get an ID back which has a number along with the name, email and but not the password, that's excluded. But then you get the role, which is a user, and then the image path and post a null by default because you just created the user. So an example here would be something like this. You have an ID of 1. These fields will all be here. Password won't be there. The role should be a user. The image path, that should be null. And the post, that should also be null. and this is of the type user. Now I might need to import this as well. So we see, and I'm just going to bring the Angular stuff up the top here. This is what we're expecting. This is what we're giving the method. And basically what we want to do now is we want to call the HTTP client spy, which has access to the post method here. So within this it here, we actually want to, let's see here, in here, we want to say HTTP client spy, and we've given it the post method. And then after we post, because we're not actually connected to the real database, and when you're doing the unit test, you probably wouldn't want to be doing that anyway. You'd probably want to do that in a more of an integration end-to-end test sort of thing if you were to do it that way. But we'll talk about that in the next video anyway. But basically, when you call the post method from the HTTP client spy, it can actually do something for us. So what we can do is we can say end, and we can, you know, reject or resolve or return values, but we want to just return the value. Now we're calling the HTTP post method, and this is in anticipation for what we're going to be doing next. So we're going to be calling the register method. So we got the auth service set up, and then we're calling the register method on the mock new user, and then, you know, we're going to get something back, so we can subscribe here. And what we're expecting back is the user of the type user, so this here. And essentially what we're doing is we're going to expect a whole bunch of properties, and then we'll complete the asynchronous operation by calling done. But the way, since we're referencing the auth service, and this register method is a post request, so when we're using the HTTP client spy, we call the post method, the next return value we'll have for us for that post method will be what's specified here. So we can just have the expected user in here. It needs to be observable, so we need to bring that in from RxJS, and that's just because, you know, it should be returning observable. I'll bring the ordering up like that. Angular third party, although still within Angular suite, and then our stuff, the service we're testing for, then, you know, helpers, models. So yeah, this means that our register method's a post method. It's going to return the expected user here. We subscribe to that, and then we can just expect a bunch of things here. And the first thing we're expecting is to have the type of the user ID to equal to number. So we don't really care that what number it is, just as long as this returns a number. I mean, if we wanted to be pedantic, we could test that it's a integer, because that's what the rows will be making for us as a primary key in SQL, or whatever database you're using. But this just means it's a little more flexible, just to test whatever number it is. So another thing we want to do here is, for the user that we're getting back, we just want to go ahead and expect that the first name, and one thing to note is, it might look like we just wrote this object and then just saying, well, does the first name equal this and does it equal that? And in a sense we sort of are, but we're doing it testing our service at the same time. So we're calling the register method with the mock values. You know, we're subscribing to that, we're expecting to get something back, and the way we've configured things is we've returned that particular value, but that is exactly what we would be expecting, sort of thing. So it could be that you'd want to test for things. So I'm not going to cover all the different tests. I'm just going to cover the things that can get you going to come up with all your own ideas. But you could be testing for things like, you put in some bad data and, then you can't register with that and stuff like that. And I might do one for if an email already exists, throw an error sort of thing. Obviously there's no database or anything like that, but we're just going to assume that it already exists and then throw there, and we'll do that next. But it's all good stuff. So we can go ahead and find the to equal here. Now I'm just going to see if that's equal to the mock new user first name here. I'm just going to duplicate this line down 2 more times. Do a Control D and change first name to last name, and change first name to email. Now, this doesn't have a password, and this might be a good example of what I was just previously talking about actually. If I have this expect, and I'm going to have user as any type here, because the password field doesn't exist here on the front end. But I want this to be undefined. So it could be that, let's say the API changed and for whatever reason it gave back the password. Well, obviously there's testing on the back end as well, and it's more critical there too, but if we were to stumble across something like that, we'd want that field to be undefined, and that would alert some eyebrows if that was to be there, even though it's encrypted, but still, and it's your password that you logged in as, but still, you don't want to be sending these things across the wire if you don't have to be. So the user role, and that should be to equal to user. So when you create an account, you're a user by default, and if you expect the user image path, well, they haven't created or uploaded an image yet, so we'll expect this to actually be null here. Let's see, to be null, and likewise with the user post. Now once again, this is what we're expecting after we subscribe to the register method and get that back, hence this done here. If you weren't doing asynchronous, you could just delete that, for example. But we're doing asynchronous operation here. So in order for this to know that, we have to explicitly just have this done method called here. And finally, we can go ahead and after it's done, we can expect the HTTP client spy post, and we can see how many times the post has been called. Now you might not want to be testing for this sort of thing, but just to demonstrate, you can have the count here, and you can set to be. So to be and to equal, that's pretty much the same thing. I guess more strictly speaking, the to equal should be used. Like this should probably be to be, for example. The number is to be a number, whereas to equal is the equality of the two properties, fields, values, etc. So, the count, in this case it could be either to be or to equal. I'm just going to use to be here, and then you can just say one call or something like that. So I'm just going to go ahead and save that and see where we're up to. Run the ng test, and we'll just wait for that to load. So it's actually building the Karma web server for us and everything like that. So we can see that everything's passing. Should create the app, should return the user. Now just to demonstrate that this is working as intended, let's just type in Jono here, for example, and then we see that we've got the test failed here. Expected Jono to equal John, and then you can see the trace, the stack trace, and you can even do things like debug and look at options and things like that, but I won't go into too much detail. So as the second unit test, what we want to do here is, let's say it should return an error if email already exists. So if you know john@hotmail.com was already in the database or the simulation of that, we would want to give back this error here. So once again, this is going to be an asynchronous operation because we're calling the same endpoint here. And what we can do here is we can just go ahead and we can have an error response, which is a new HTTP error response. And what I'm going to have here is the error message. You can call this whatever you like. But what I'm going to have described here is a user has already been created with this email address. And you can also give the status. So it's a bad request, which is a 400. Now, once again, we can call the HTTP client spy, call the post method, and what we're expecting as a return value here is we actually just want to throw an error. So we can just call this throw error. This is coming from RxJS. So we can wrap this like this, and we can just return back or throw the error of the error response. So we'll create a HTTP error response. We're immediately throwing it because that's what we're testing for. We're assuming it already exists. We're testing the error, and then we want to make sure that when we call the register method, it's able to handle that as we want. So we've got the auth service here. We've got the register method. Now we can type in our mock new user object here. We can subscribe. Now, previously when we were subscribing, we just we're handling the case that everything was all working fine. Now we got error handling set up. That's catching errors for us, both on the client and on the server, in the error handling videos. But the way this is different to the above code, to the above subscription, is we're not really interested in the first callback. We're interested in the second. So if you're not sure what the 3 parameters of a subscription are, by default, normally you don't worry about it because you just get the return value and you send it back, and then you got the error handling, or that's somewhere else. But you can actually pass in an object here of 3 things. So this whole thing here, this refers to the next, because you got a subscription, and then the next thing that emits the value will allow this code block to run. But you can also have it in the case where you have an error, which the second value in the object can be, and that's what we're going to have in our case. And the third value you could have is when it's completed, for example. And observables don't always complete, but they can. So for example, like a timer, when that hits a certain number, it finishes, and then you're no longer interested in the data stream after that point, or something like that. But we don't need to concern ourselves with that. We can just go ahead and have our next method here. And we don't actually want to, we're not expecting anything here, but if it somehow does make it into this block, we can use this done.fail method here, and this will log it for us out in our error handling, in our testing logs. So we expected a bad request error, and here is the one we're really interested in, is the error, which is a HTTP error response of the exact same type. So let's make that a lowercase h, and then I'll open the code block here. So what we can expect is we want our HTTP error response, and we want that error message here. Now I've done to equal and to be. I think this is a good opportunity to use the to contain. Sometimes you don't want things to be too specific for things that have the possibility to change. Error handling and messages can possibly change. So rather than testing for equality between that and that, just to demonstrate, and this might not even be sufficient, but we can just have something like already been created. So if the error handling message changed for whatever reason to an email address has already been created or something like that with these keywords, then this assertion will be true, and hence the code will be a success. And of course that's asynchronous, so we just need to have this done here. So let's go ahead and save that and see what we get here. We see we get our 3 successes, and if we open up Karma, our test runner, we can see that the Jasmine test that got executed was the app component should create the app, and the auth service for the register method, it should return the user, and it should return an error if email already exists. So we're doing really well, and that's actually all we need to do for the auth service and the auth service spec file. Now we can start to have a look at how we can test for a component. So let me open up our component. So if I just go and find the auth page, and just to refresh our memories on what it looks like, I'll just open up the TypeScript here and the template, and we can see that what we've got here is we've got these ionic components, and we've also got this template driven form which has the name form, and this can call the onSubmit, and this component can toggle between the join page and the login page, and there's various fields, input fields, so first name, last name, optionally, and email and password. So we want to test this component. So and if we look at the TypeScript, we can see that we've got this view child. We're viewing the form for the template reference, and by default we're going to be on the login page, although it could be the login or join page. There's this toggle text which more or less hides the first name and last name and changes the text of the buttons a little. And then there's also this onSubmit, so you can submit the form, it can hit the services, and if you're logging in, it will reroute you to the home page. So there's that dependency, and if not, it will just toggle the text. So we want to test for these sorts of things. So what we'll do is in our auth folder here, we'll just have an auth.page.spec.ts file here, and we'll begin to work on our our component testing. So one thing I might do here is I might just copy the general structure of things. So I'm just going to do a big copy here and delete a whole bunch of things. Now, we don't need a lot of this. So I'm just going to delete everything there. That may be used. We've got this mock new user. We will need that actually, but it's coming from a different area. So I'm just going to delete that and then re-bring it in. So new user. We're also going to have our mock user, which is of the type user. And we should have this here. But I might make it a little more less hard-coded by having the first name here. And I'm just going to copy this down. Now that's okay to be user null, and then this will just be the mock user last name and the email. Auth service, we will need that, but that's coming from services / auth service. We'll just get rid of these imports here. So what we want to do here, we've got this rather than testing for this service here, we want to have something like let component be related to the auth page. That's what we're testing here. So we'll bring that up. That's the test. And we can say let fixture. This is of the type component fixture. And this, as we've seen, it sort of creates the ability to have the instance of the particular component. So let's just go ahead and bring that in from Angular testing, or Angular core testing. Now we will have this router spy again. We won't need the HTTP client spy, I don't think. And we've got our mock new user, we've got our mock user. We'll need to bring in the user type here. We'll bring the Angular stuff to the top. So we can also, what we want to do is in the previous service, we're testing the service, we're actually testing the service itself. So we need to have the real service. But we're doing unit testing. So although we use the service in the component, we don't want to test for that because we've already tested for it here independently in the service. And I obviously you would want to have all of the methods tested and all that sort of stuff. But just for demonstration purposes, I've focused on this particular register test. It's more or less more of the same. And that means we just want to sort of mock the service. So we can have this mock auth service, and it's going to be a partial of the auth service, meaning it's going to have the properties and methods of the auth service they can be optional, and we only really want to concern ourselves with if we look at the auth page here, we're either logging in and registering, we're either logging in or registering. So we want to have those methods here. So let's start with register. We don't even care about the arguments. All we want to do here is just return an observable of the mock user that we just created above. And if I copy this down, the login method, once again, we don't care about the arguments. We don't care too much about the contents, although I will just keep the types the same. And we're just saying, we're mocking the service, get some JSON Web Token back. And obviously, when you do it for real, you're going to get a real JSON Web Token. And once again, where unit tests, they catch a lot of things, but you may also need to have the integration tests to really see how the component and services all work together, and perhaps even with the database or a mock of the database, depending on how you like to do things. But we will definitely cover that in the next video. So we've got our mock auth service here. Now I'm just going to delete this. Actually, I'm going to cut this here, and this is perfectly okay to do. We're actually, for our test suite, we're having the auth page, and you can have the test suite defined outside of the before each method. So it just turns out when we're creating things with testing modules and stuff, it's easier to do this way. So I got this before each method here, and we don't need this anymore, and we don't need this either. And actually, I'm going to just cut this up above, just because I'm going to reuse that, but I just want to get the shape of this before each right. So what we're doing is so we're going to need to we need to have this method here. This is sort of just like putting the async keyword before something, and we're going to have wait for async here, and we don't actually have to use a wait or anything like that. This wait for async, it's coming from the Angular core testing, so we'll handle waiting for the asynchronous things, and it works with Jasmine, and Angular's obviously included Jasmine into its bunch of packages that make up Angular, so it works nicely. And this is where we can wait for async, and we can just go ahead, and I'll explain why things are done like this in just a moment. But basically it's to do with the fact that we need to reference this test bed, and this is coming from Angular core testing, because unlike this when we're testing the service, this is more like the app component test. We're creating a fake module here, and that takes a little bit of time. It doesn't happen instantly. It takes some time for it to be created. So we can have this configure testing module here, and this takes in all the things a module would take. So imports. So we know that we're going to be dealing with the forms module, so we can bring that in. And we also got Ionic stuff that we're dealing with, so we can bring the Ionic module in, so we can use all those components. Now for declarations, that's the thing that we're testing. The component we're testing is our auth page. And the providers, if we have a look at the auth page, we can see that, like the auth servers, it takes the router in, and then the auth server instead of the HTTP. So what we can do is we can have an array of objects. So what we want to do here is we want to provide the router, but we just want to use the value that we've defined in the router spy. So we've got this router spy here. It's a partial of router. And then what we've done before each of these tests before this configuration of the testing module, we only need the navigate by URL method, and the spies allowing us to simulate that rather than mock something that's more like of this sort of form. So we get a subset of the properties and methods that behave as if they were there. So that means when we're doing anything with the router, like navigating by URL, it will refer to this spy rather than the actual value, although it spies on the actual value for it, particularly for the navigate by URL method there. So I hope that's clear. And then we also have our service that we're looking at, and let's see, here's our mock auth service. So we've got our register method and login methods. Now we already looked at the register method. We know it returns a mock user, and then when you log in, you get the JSON Web Token back in the object with the token there. And both of those methods are used in our module here. So we can just go ahead and use our mock auth service values. So when the auth when the auth component is referenced and used, we can go ahead and override those values and use our mock there, because once again we're testing the unit testing, not doing everything integrated. And most of the time you can just do unit tests with some integration test. But yeah, again, we'll go there in the next video. And then schemas here, this is just similar to the app spec file. You just need these custom elements schema, and we just have a look at our imports. Now we'll just bring the Angular stuff up to the top. We'll bring RxJS here. It's third party, even though it comes with Angular. And then there's Ionic. So this is all, and we've got an Angular. What's going on? Okay, so we've got Angular stuff, Ionic stuff, RxJS, and then our stuff. So now that we've got our module set up and we've set up our mocks and spies and just got the things in that we need to do our unit test for the auth page, that means we can come here and we can just go ahead and we can just compile components. That just makes everything this work. It compiles, takes a little bit of time, hence the wait for it to sync. And we want this to happen before every one of our unit tests, but we also want to create the component before every unit test. Now you could have a second before each here, and that might look cleaner. It doesn't really matter. I'm just going to have it here in one go. This is where we create the fixture. Now we've set up here, we've got the component equal to the auth page, the fixture equal to the component fixture of the auth page. So if I refer to the test bed that I just created, i.e. the module, the testing module, we can, since the components are being compiled, we can create the component that we want, which is the auth page. So the component, this is going to be equal to the fixture. So the fixture is equal to creating the component of the auth page, but the actual component is the instance of that. So we just want the component instance here. And then the fixture, we need to call this detect changes method. It triggers a change detection cycle for the component, and we need to do this when we make any changes of any sort. So for example, what we're going to do on our component, so this component here, it's relating to, it has an ng form, but this form, this sort of assumes that you're typing in data from, you know, the client and all that sort of stuff, and we want to circumvent that. So what we need to do is we need to explicitly give the form values. So we can just say the component form, this is equal, and this has the value of the mock new user. So that's just that there. And then, you know, if we're using the register a login, you only need 2 of the fields, but it doesn't matter. We'll just work for both. So the value mock new user, that object here. Now this is complaining, and the reason it's complaining is because it's expecting the ng form, and we don't have to concern ourselves with all the other stuff. We can just say this is as ng form, and then we'll just bring that in and import that from ng forms, and there it is. Now, since I've made this change here, what I'll do here, so our value's changed on the component, so we reference the component instance that we're testing, and we go ahead and we just detect some changes here. Alright, so all of the work's in setting up the test. Now we can actually go ahead and just run the unit test. And whenever you're running a unit test for a component, you just want to make sure that it gets created nicely. So let's just go ahead and save that. So just need to find the right level of indentation here. I think it's here. So before each is running all the way to here, and then we want to do our unit test. So what should happen? Well, it should create with the form values. Form. So I'm going to once again have this wait for a sync here. And the reason I'm doing this wait for a sync here, and we didn't see this elsewhere, but we're actually, I need to refer to the fixture, so the component instance, and when it's stable, and that returns a promise. So I can use a tack on a dot then here, and we don't really need what it's returning or anything like that, but when it's ready, basically, because you know this is an asynchronous operation, you need to wait for it to, you know, do these things. Hence, when dealing with the form value change, we need to well, determine that after things are done. So we have this wait for a sync for that, and then we also on top of that have this fixture when stable. This might be a little bit of overkill, and you know, I'll leave that judgment up to you to make how you like to structure your test here. I've seen an article on the Angular page that did something like that, so I'm just copying that. Whether it's necessary or not, it's another question to be truthy. So basically, we've set up our module, we've got all our dependencies ready, we've set up our mocks and spies. We want to test if the component exists, and you always want to do this for your components that you're testing, because the configuration is often the hardest part of the test, and you know, you want to make sure things are working. If things aren't working, for example, you typed in, you know, you got a service, mock service that doesn't have the right function that gets called through the page component, or you know, just anything that went wrong with this initial setup, it won't actually build the component for you. So you want to just check that that's working, and then like the test name says, we also want to just see the component. Now before each we're getting the form values, so we've set the value, and basically we want this to equal the mock new user. So we've set that there, and now we're just making sure that the component renders and has that value, so when we do our other test that it works. So let's just go ahead and save that and just see where we're at. And we have a success here, and we can just go ahead and we can see our auth page should create with form values, and that's passed very nicely for us along with the other tests that have passed. So let's go ahead and sort of write some of the unit tests that we really want. So we'll just do some simple ones to start off with. So it should have initial submission type of login. Look at the component. You see by default the submission type is login, so therefore we will see the login view or the template driven form without the first name and last name there. So you could check for either case. I'm just going to check for the submission type. So let's go ahead and have our assertion here. So what we're expecting for our component submission type, we're expecting that to be equal to login. We get 5 successes, nice and easy. Now we'll just duplicate that line down. It should toggle submission type to join. So we're expecting this to be join in the event that we call our function toggle text, and we're making a change here. So let's just go ahead and say the fixture instance of the component. We can go ahead and detect those changes. Save that, we get 6 successes. Alright, great. So let's write our next case here. So let me just copy this here so I don't have to rewrite the shape of that. So now what we want is to, when we look in here, we can see that when we're in login mode, it's actually going to navigate to the home URL, and that's sort of why we've got these. Well, in addition to needing to have a placeholder for the auth service, we have this mock auth service, and in addition to that, we also have the router spy, and the router spy is what's having this here. Now, whether you need that here and in here in this other spec file is debatable. Perhaps you don't, and you could go ahead and just put this in the particular unit test that you're doing. I've already just done it like this. It's no big deal. That's the decision for you to make. You might use it in other view methods, so that's one reason why you might want to have it like that. But again, I mean, you don't really need to be optimizing for your test code or anything like that. The test code's there, so it helps you write clean code, catch for any bugs in your actual production code. Not really writing super clean test code or anything like that. It's more just a tool to help you code better and catch things you wouldn't normally catch. So with that said, what this third test should have here, or fourth test I should say, is it should route to home page upon login. So straight away, we're expecting, even though we've done this test here and we've said we're expecting the changes from calling the toggle text function to have the new submission type on that component instance to equal to join, because we have this before each, which runs before each of the unit tests, and we go ahead and create the new component instance there and detect those changes, it should revert back to the original, which has this login here. So what we're expecting initially is this login here, and then we're just gonna once again not once again, but we're going to call the component. Now we get to call the onSubmit method here. So just taking a look at that quickly. We're in login mode. So we're expecting this code here to be executed, which calls the auth service, and our auth service is replaced with our mock auth service, which has the login. Now we don't really care about the return of that, although we could if we wanted to in an integration test or something like that, but you'd do that logic in the service spec if you're doing something like that. We're more interested in the component level behavior, and particularly this router navigation to the home endpoint here. So what we can do is, well, we have our spy, and that's the router spy that we've created, and it has this navigate by URL, and I'm just going to explicitly call this a Jasmine spy, because then we get access to the Jasmine spy methods. So I want to have a look at the navigation arguments. So I've got this spy here, and we can cause, so basically how this works is we've got a spy, we've got the router spy, and that's spying on the actual real router on the particular method of the navigate by URL. So it will copy those sort of functionalities and just use them as needed. So when we call this component on submit, it references the navigate by URL method, so that'll be our spy method overtaking that, and we can, since we've got this Jasmine spy type here with its own methods and stuff like that, we can say, all right, well, we're spying on that. Let's just look at the first call of that, which we just explicitly called here. And this is just finding the arguments. You could have more, but it just turns out that we've only got one here, so we just take the 0th argument, so localhost 4200 or whatever it is slash home. I think I only said 8100, but it doesn't really matter. We're only interested in the args. So what we're expecting here is the nav args that we got back from there. We now want that to be equal, or to be slash home, and if that passes, it's proof that we've gone from our login page URL to the new slash home using our spy here, and we save that and we get a success, and that's great. So we'll just wrap up with one more unit test here. So I'll just go ahead and copy this one here. So it should toggle submission type to login after registering. So we've hit the login portion of this, and we've navigated to the home successfully. And of course you could be testing for things like if the email and password aren't there and all that sort of stuff, but that's pretty easy to do from this position. So I'll leave that up to you, along with any of the other unit tests throughout the application you want to implement. Like most things in this course, it's showing you how to do all the things you need to do. I don't want to be too repetitive or anything. The course is already like 30 hours long, so you know, if you made it this far, I'm sure you'll be able to do things like that. So just taking a look at this final join section here, you know, if you got the information you need, just extract that and then call the register method. And the register method is just returning the new user, but it's also toggling the text, so you're converting the view from the login page to the join page, or vice versa. So essentially we need to go ahead and say, well, initially we're expecting things to be the login page as mentioned previously, and then we're going to call the component, we'll just call it toggle text, because we want to assume we're already on that page there, so we can expect to be on the join page. And then when I run the component.onSubmit function, we'll be submitting it from that particular view. So and the form data, once again, has already been set up for us before each of the things, and it's going to be equal to the mock new user here. So on submit, that should run. We'll have the data it needs. Could test for things where it doesn't have that data. Quite trivial, and you probably would want to do that, but I'll leave that up to you to do. Call the register. We're mocking the auth service register method. That data's passed in for us, and we subscribe and then toggle the text. So basically what we want to do here is we just want to expect that the component submission type is going to be back to the login state. So should toggle submission type to login after registering. So let's go ahead and save that. And we can see that all of our tests have passed. We've just refreshing that. The app component that was already created, and that passed. Then we worked on the auth service with the register methods, and it returns the user and returns an error if an email already exists. And then the auth page we just worked on, we're looking at the login and join pages, and then they both had the dependencies between, you know, either HTTP or the auth service and the router. And we've tested these in isolation so far. We've done the unit tests in isolation as you would. So that wraps up the tutorial on using the Karma test runner that we're looking at to render the server and, you know, test our components, run the test, and in comparison with their components, all the testing things. And then we've also done the Jasmine, you know, writing the tests, setting them up, doing the assertions, and, you know, all of that sort of stuff. So one thing that would be good to work on from here is looking at how things work in an integrated fashion. So we've tested for things in isolation, and that's really good. You want to be doing that as you build your project out. It helps you write cleaner code because you often write smaller functions and you know, have predictable outcomes and all of that sort of stuff. And it helps you to catch errors and edge cases and all those sorts of things, and that's awesome. But then in the next video, we'll be taking a look at integration testing, end-to-end testing, and seeing things all work in one sort of cohesive, connected sort of manner. So if you're interested in that, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks so much for watching. Cheers. I'll see you then.